Walter, a frail 78-year-old veteran, was dragged out of a bustling mall by security, humiliated and powerless despite decades of sacrifice. His dog tags, barely visible beneath his jacket, told a story no one dared ask about. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Walter Mason's slow steps echoed hollowly against the cold tiles, the sterile fluorescent lights above, casting a harsh glow that seemed to mock the frailty of his frame. Every inch of his lined face told stories no one in this bustling mall could imagine. Secret missions, perilous nights in foreign lands, the weight of lives saved and lost. Yet here, on this ordinary Thursday afternoon, Walter was just an old man with nothing more than a fading memory and a hunger for peace. His jacket, frayed at the cuffs, held the only constant in his life now, the dog tags hanging close to his heart. They were more than metal. They were a lifetime of duty and honor, silent witnesses to battles fought far from the comfort of these polished corridors. But none of that mattered to Mike, the security guard standing like a wall in his path. Mike's youth was sharp, his impatience sharper, like a blade slicing through the respect Walter deserved but never received. "Sir, you can't be here." The words hit harder than any bullet, stripping Walter of his dignity. His voice, shaky but firm, tried to build a bridge. "I'm just sitting down to eat." But Mike's gaze was cold steel, unyielding, devoid of empathy. "We've had complaints. You're causing trouble." Complaints Walter couldn't even fathom. Grievances born from fear, misunderstanding, or maybe pure indifference. To Mike, this was just his job. A box to check, a rule to enforce without question. Walter's protests, measured, respectful, drowned under the rising tide of authority. When Mike signaled for backup, it wasn't a call for peace. It was a declaration of war against a man who had long since stopped fighting for himself. Hands, rough and uncompromising, gripped Walter's arms, shoving him forward like a piece of discarded debris. The weight of humiliation pressed down heavier than any pack he'd carried in the desert or jungle. Inside Walter, something flickered, anger not just at the security guards, but at the larger system that allowed such disrespect to flourish. A lifetime of sacrifice reduced to a disturbance complaint. The very people he'd sworn to protect now turned their backs, blind to his history, deaf to his pain. The coldness of the mall's polished floors reflected the coldness of a society that forgot its own. Yet, beneath the humiliation, beneath the shoves and sneers, Walter's eyes burned with something fierce, an ember of defiance that refused to die. This wasn't just about being thrown out of a mall. It was about reclaiming the respect stripped away by indifference and ignorance. A man who had once led secret operations, navigating shadows and danger, now faced the harshest enemy: invisibility. As the doors slid shut behind him, the murmur of the crowd inside felt like a distant storm. Outside, the fading afternoon light stretched long shadows across his path, but Walter's resolve only grew stronger. The world might not see the warrior beneath the weathered exterior, but Walter knew who he was. And this unjust expulsion, this moment of scorn, would not be the end of his story. News traveled with a speed Walter could scarcely comprehend, ricocheting through the local media like wildfire. What began as a mundane expulsion quickly mutated into a narrative that gripped the community's conscience. A frail old man, a relic of another time, shoved out by a young, overzealous guard. Headlines painted Walter with a tender brush. Veteran humiliated at local mall. Elderly war hero ejected in shocking incident. Sympathy swelled, but beneath the surface, a far deeper truth was waiting to be unearthed. Emily, Walter's granddaughter, was not content to watch the story twist into mere sentimentality. Her resolve was fierce, tempered by the sharp clarity of a granddaughter's loyalty. She refused to allow the world to see her grandfather as just an unfortunate relic. There was a fire beneath that frailty, a lifetime of unspoken sacrifice. She began to peel back the layers, poring over musty documents and hidden files, tracing back decades through classified operations and whispered histories. What emerged was nothing short of extraordinary. Walter Mason wasn't merely a veteran. He was a shadow warrior of the Cold War, an architect of covert missions so secretive they remained buried in government archives. His dog tags, once overlooked, now gleamed with a new significance: the identity of a man who had slipped through the veil of history, invisible yet indispensable. Walter's missions had unfolded in forgotten, hostile theaters where every move was a risk, every decision a matter of life and death. Lives had been saved in silence, alliances forged in shadows, threats neutralized without fanfare. The revelation sent ripples through the public consciousness. How could a man who had carried the burden of secret wars, whose sacrifices had shielded nations from unseen perils, be cast aside like an inconvenience? Outrage grew, not just at the mall incident, but at the larger societal failure that allowed a hero to fade into obscurity. Questions surfaced, sharp and persistent. Who protects the protectors once their service ends? What honor remains for those who fought without recognition? Mike, the young security guard, suddenly found himself under intense scrutiny. His actions, though ostensibly by the book, were now seen through a harsher lens. The complaints he'd cited seemed trivial, insufficient to justify the humiliation he'd inflicted. Protocol collided with humanity, and the public demanded accountability. Mike's position became tenuous, his once unquestioned authority fractured by the weight of newfound understanding. Walter, who had long buried the pain beneath layers of silence, found a resurgence of strength. Despite the rawness of his public humiliation, he chose to speak, not from bitterness, but from a place of hard-earned dignity. His voice, once quiet and reserved, resonated in interviews, community gatherings, and veteran forums. He recounted not only the hardship of war, but the ongoing struggle for respect and recognition in peacetime. His story became a testament to resilience, a clarion call reminding society of the true cost behind medals and ceremonies. The response was profound. Support swelled around Walter like a rising tide. Neighbors, fellow veterans, activists, and even strangers united in admiration and outrage. Letters flooded in, offers of solidarity appeared, and discussions ignited about how to better honor and care for those who had given so much. Walter's courage became a beacon, illuminating the dark corners where forgotten heroes had long been left to languish. In this awakening, hope grew, quiet but unyielding, a hope that justice might be restored, not only for Walter Mason, but for countless others whose sacrifices remained hidden, waiting to be acknowledged. The atmosphere inside the mall's management office was thick with tension the day Walter received the invitation. The very institution that had cast him out now sought to make amends, not through hollow words, but through a carefully crafted gesture of restitution. The letter was formal, bearing the mall's logo and the signatures of senior executives who recognized the damage done. This was not merely a public relations move. It was an acknowledgement that the incident had exposed a deeper failure, one that demanded change. Walter arrived steady but unhurried, his presence commanding without force. The worn leather of his jacket and the subtle gleam of his dog tags spoke volumes before he said a word. The managers, security heads, and PR representatives gathered to meet him carried a mixture of nervous anticipation and genuine respect. They knew this moment was more than an apology. It was a reckoning. The apology was sincere and unambiguous. The mall's senior director expressed regret for the way Walter had been treated, acknowledging the pain and humiliation he endured. More importantly, the conversation moved quickly from apology to action. Policies were to be revised, with special provisions created to honor and protect veterans and the elderly from undue harassment or expulsion. Training programs for security personnel would be intensified, emphasizing empathy, respect, and an understanding of the sacrifices behind the uniforms. Behind the scenes, Walter's presence spurred a quiet revolution in how the mall, and by extension the community, viewed those who had served. A committee was formed to work directly with veterans groups, crafting guidelines that balanced security needs with compassion. The mall began displaying plaques commemorating local veterans, transforming its sterile halls into spaces of remembrance and gratitude. Amid this institutional shift, the personal confrontation between Walter and Mike unfolded with a raw honesty rare in such fraught circumstances. Mike, still young and brash but visibly humbled, sought out Walter for a private meeting away from the glare of the media. "I didn't know," Mike said simply, his voice thick with remorse. "I didn't understand what you carried with you, or what you'd done." Walter studied Mike for a moment. This was a man who had made a mistake, but was willing to face it. The bitterness that had burned inside Walter since that humiliating day softened, replaced by a steadiness born of decades of hardship and forgiveness. "None of that excuses what happened," Walter replied quietly, "but it means something that you came to say it." Their handshake was tentative but genuine, a bridging of a generational divide and a testament to the power of understanding. It was not a moment of complete reconciliation, but the first step toward mutual respect, a fragile yet hopeful thread woven from confrontation and contrition. Walter's story soon transcended the walls of the mall, rippling outward into the wider community. He was invited to speak at schools, veteran organizations, and public forums, his voice a living archive of courage and resilience. He became a symbol not just of one man's struggle, but of a nation's capacity for reflection and growth. At a solemn ceremony held in the town square, Walter stood tall amid the crowd of veterans, families, and supporters. His posture was dignified, not because he sought recognition, but because he embodied the endurance and honor so often demanded of those who serve. From the sidelines, his grandson watched with awe, whispering in reverence, "That's my grandpa, a real hero." The chapter closed on a note of triumph not born from vengeance, but from justice and inspiration. The injustice that had once threatened to diminish Walter's legacy instead illuminated a path forward, a reminder that true honor never fades, but patiently awaits the moment it is finally recognized and embraced by the world.